Welcome back. New regulations and enforcement policies are introduced almost weekly in the hemp industry. We're back with Blake Butler, Executive Director of the North Carolina Hemp Association, and Dr. Marnie Coit, Agricultural Law Lecturer at NCSU. And to both of you, I'm so glad you could hang around. Let me ask you about just the overall state of the industry. I know there are farmers who are growing outdoors and those that are growing in greenhouses. What's going on with that?
We have about 13,000 acres being cultivated outdoors, but we have 5 million square feet of indoor grows and greenhouse grows. And the reason this is because growers can harvest 3 times a year in an indoor greenhouse complex, but they can only harvest once if they plant outdoors. And last year, a lot of them got caught with the 2 hurricanes that came through, Florence and Michael. And at this point, we have to harvest CBD plants by hand. So if you have 1,500 CBD plants in 1 acre, if you have 3 acres, that's 4,500 CBD plants that need to be harvested by hand. And when a hurricane rolls in, you got to get those plants out of the ground. So we're learning our lessons, but we see farmers starting to erect greenhouses on where they might have planted outdoors, but just to be sure they can not only protect their investment, but by harvesting 3 times a year, they can diversify as far finding buyers.
When farmers choose greenhouses over outdoor, why does that make economical sense to them? Is it because this particular plant you can harvest 3 times a year versus other plants that they may or may not grow indoors?
I think that's a part of it. So as Blake said, it's partly how many times a year you can harvest. And so if you're talking about a plant like industrial hemp, right now, the price per clone, so if you're buying a clone, that's the equivalent. If you think about how farmers plant and how they grow crops, you can either start from seed or you can start from a clone with hemp. So if you're starting with a clone, right now the price is approximately $4 a clone. So if you're paying $4 a clone, and then yes, you want to make sure that you're protecting your investment as much as possible. And yes, if you can harvest 3 times a year, that does make
sense.
It correct.
And one thing about a greenhouse, if I can just add, Bill, is that you control the light cycle. You have a better plan for pest management, better plan for irrigation. Outdoors, again, you're relying on Mother Nature and some of the outdoor elements and kind of base your plan on that.
Yes.
So indoors, you can have a more solid way to get from clone or seed to harvest.
Well, we kind of talked about it in the first segment about the differences between marijuana and hemp, and you brought up THC in the 2 different plants. Who oversees the compliance? Because there's a different level of THC in marijuana versus hemp plants, correct?
Correct. So who oversees that overall
Yes.
is the federal government, because that standard did come from the 2014 Farm Bill and then the 2018 Farm Bill. But what that Farm Bill says is that it's up to the states to create pilot programs. So for every state currently that has a pilot program, they are going to be the ones who go out to inspect. So for example, in North Carolina, it is up to the farmer to contact the NCDA and ask them to come out and do an inspection prior to the time that they harvest. And then they will take a sample, and that sample gets sent to a lab. The lab will analyze it and then send that information back to the state, and that's how you are determining how much THC is in the plant.
So you want to be in compliance.
Yes.
And so once they send that sample back and say you're compliant where you are, you can go ahead through harvest and dry. And that's where it becomes very similar to tobacco. After you harvest, you do clean the plants, hang them upside down, and dry them for 7 to 10 days in an indoor facility that's climate controlled. And then after that period is over, you shuck and buck the flower, and then the stems and stalks that are left is what's termed the biomass. So you could sell your stems and stalks and your flower to a processor, an extractor, a retailer. So there's a lot of options there.
Oh, I've heard of people being arrested at Disney World and airports because they had the little vial of THC.
Or CBD.
Or CBD. CBD. Has that changed? And I get a sense that this is such a new industry that there's a lot of legal limbo here. Is that true?
Correct. And that's causing a lot of issues.
Yeah.
So it's true and not true. In some ways, we know the law. We know in some ways that the law is very clear. But there, I think, are 2 issues. One is The Farm Bill was passed, the 2018 Farm Bill was passed in December of 2018, but once the legislation is passed, we still are waiting for the regulations from the agencies. So for example, the USDA is going to be regulating hemp nationwide. They've been charged with doing that. In order to regulate hemp nationwide, the Farm Bill said that they have to approve plans that are submitted by every single state. So first, before all of those state plans can be approved, the USDA has to come up with their regulations, right? So we are now in June of 2019. So USDA has said that they will come up with their regulations by the end of this calendar year so that they're in place before the next growing season. But the piece that's missing in that is even once USDA comes up with their regulations, every single state that has a pilot program still needs to submit their plan, and the USDA has to approve their plan. So we don't know how long that's going to take. Another agency is the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. They're the agency that will approve certain pesticides or insecticides for this particular crop. Right now, one of the issues that farmers face is that there are no approved chemicals for industrial hemp because the EPA hasn't gone through that regulatory process yet.
I'm sure farmers get loans from banks, and the banks are used to dealing with farmers with cash crops and that sort of thing. Hemp's relatively new. Are farmers who are interested, are they having difficulty getting loans, for instance? Are bankers becoming more accepting of this new crop?
They are. I mean, I can name 7 or 8 North Carolina-based banks that are being very friendly to our hemp growers. But you bring up a good point, because in the Farm Bill, it says that banks can now do business with hemp growers. It also says that hemp growers can get crop insurance. That's one of the most frustrating things for us right now, and crop insurance will not be available till next year. So all these guys that are growing right now, they're running that risk that crop cannot be insured in this calendar year.
I mean, if people were interested in starting to grow, what would you suggest? Where should they go?
Definitely start with the North Carolina State Extension website, as well as the Department of Agriculture.
Beautiful.
I mean, they have the most comprehensive information, and our site links to all that information. They've just done a phenomenal job of not only pushing this program forward, but really looking at where the research opportunities are so we can form our state into a contender in the industry as it emerges.
I could do this all day, though.
We could too.
There's a lot of information here we didn't get to, so maybe we'll have an opportunity to do this again. But thank you both so much. And don't go away. We'll be right back with 2 local retailers in the CBD business.